5 nurses in 5 days. That was the record at the Obsidian Tower. They didn't leave because of the long hours, and they didn't quit because of the pay, which was triple the industry standard. They ran because of him. Dante Moretti. A man with a bullet wound in his side and ice in his veins. They called him the Devil of Chicago, a man who chewed up the weak and spat them out. But they didn't know Violet Sterling. They didn't know that a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. She didn't just walk into the lion's den to change his bandages. She walked in to break every single rule he ever made. And when the secrets of that penthouse finally come out, you won't believe who was actually pulling the strings. Rain lashed against the cracked window of the tiny studio apartment in the south side of Chicago. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and impending doom. Violet Sterling sat at her chipped laminate table, staring at the bank notification on her phone screen. Balance, 12,044. She rubbed her temples, the headache that had been lurking there for 3 days, finally blooming into full-blown agony. On the counter lay a stack of medical bills, each envelope stamped with the terrifying red ink of final notice. They weren't for her. They were for Toby, her younger brother, whose cystic fibrosis treatments were bleeding them dry. The insurance from her agency shifts had capped out 2 weeks ago. Violet was 26, but tonight she felt 80. She was a trauma nurse by trade, one of the best at St. Jude's before the budget cuts. But lately she was just a woman drowning in debt. Her phone buzzed. It was a private number. Usually she wouldn't answer. It was likely a debt collector named Gary who liked to call at dinner time. But something in her gut, a cold, sharp instinct, told her to pick up. Violet Sterling. The voice was male, smooth and clipped. It sounded like a suit. Speaking. She said, her voice raspy from exhaustion. This is Arthur Vance, representing a private client in the Gold Coast district. Your agency MedStaff Pro listed you as a specialist in acute trauma and difficult patients. Violet frowned. I'm not on the active roster for private home care, Mr. Vance. I do ER rotations. We know, Vance said. We also know about the outstanding balance at Chicago Children's Hospital for Tobias Sterling, $34,000. Violet's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles turned white. Who is this? Is this a collection agency? No, Ms. Sterling. This is a job offer, a live-in position. 7 days, $50,000, cash, tax-free. The room went silent. The only sound was the refrigerator humming and the rain hitting the glass. $50,000. That would clear Toby's debt and pay rent for a year. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. What's the catch? Violet asked, her nursing instincts kicking in. Nobody pays 50 grand for a week of nursing, unless the patient is radioactive or worse. The patient is recovering from surgery, Vance said, his tone carefully neutral. He is particular. We have gone through 5 nurses since Monday. They found his temperament incompatible with their employment. 5 nurses? Violet asked. In 1 week, did he fire them? 2 resigned in tears. 1 threatened a lawsuit. The other 2 simply ran out of the building and left their coats behind. Violet looked at the bills on the table. She looked at the photo of Toby on the fridge, smiling despite the oxygen tube in his nose. When do I start? A car is outside your building now. A black Mercedes Maybach. You have 5 minutes. Violet didn't pack clothes. She packed her scrubs, her stethoscope, and her pride. She walked out into the rain, leaving the crumbling apartment behind, unaware she was stepping out of poverty and straight into the line of fire. The car ride was silent. The driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and a scar running through his eyebrow, didn't say a word. He drove her to the Obsidian Tower, the tallest, darkest residential spire in the city. It was a monolith of black glass and steel that looked down on Chicago like a judgment. They bypassed the lobby. The driver used a key card on a private elevator that had no buttons, only a retinal scanner. As they ascended, Violet's ears popped. The elevator doors slid open directly into a penthouse that was larger than her entire apartment building. It was stark, modern, and freezing. The floor was polished marble, the furniture was Italian leather, and the view of the city was breathtaking. But the air was thick with tension. Men in dark suits stood at key points in the room. Security, obviously, but heavily armed. She spotted the distinct outline of shoulder holsters under their jackets. Arthur Vance was waiting for her. He was older than he sounded on the phone, with silver hair and eyes that assessed her worth in seconds. Ms. Sterling, punctual, good. "Where is the patient?" Violet asked, skipping the pleasantries. "Down the hall, master bedroom. His name is Dante Moretti. You are to address him as Mr. Moretti. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not ask personal questions. You administer the antibiotics and pain management, change the dressings, and ensure he doesn't tear his sutures. If you see or hear anything regarding his business dealings, you forget it immediately. Sign this." He shoved a non-disclosure agreement toward her. Violet scanned it. The penalty for leaking information was more money than she would make in 10 lifetimes. She signed it without hesitation. "One warning," Vance said, lowering his voice. "He is in a foul mood. He hates doctors. He hates hospitals. And right now, he hates everyone. Do not take it personally. Just do the job." Violet nodded, took a deep breath, and walked down the long, dimly lit hallway. The master bedroom smelled of rubbing alcohol iron and expensive whiskey. The curtains were drawn, leaving the room in shadows. In the center of the room lay a king-sized bed with black silk sheets. A man was lying there, propped up by pillows, his chest bare and heavily bandaged. Even in the dim light, Violet could see he was physically imposing. Broad shoulders defined muscle, and a landscape of old scars crossing his skin. His face was turned toward the window, sharp jawline clenched tight. "Get out," he growled. His voice was a low rumble, like thunder trapped in a canyon. Violet didn't flinch. She walked to the bedside table and set down her medical bag. "I can't do that, Mr. Moretti. I haven't checked your vitals yet." Dante Moretti turned his head slowly. His eyes were dark, almost black, and burning with a feverish intensity. He looked at her not like a person, but like an annoyance, a fly to be swatted. "I told Vance to stop sending me these incompetent little girls in scrubs. I don't need a babysitter." "I'm not a babysitter," Violet said, snapping on a pair of blue latex gloves. "I'm the person keeping you from going septic. Now I need to check the drain on that wound." She reached for the blanket. Dante's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron-hard despite his injury. "Do not touch me." Violet looked at his hand on her wrist, then up at his eyes. "Mr. Moretti, your heart rate is elevated. You're sweating, and based on the pallor of your skin, you're in significant pain. You can break my wrist if you want, but then you'll have to explain to Vance why you need a 6th nurse. And honestly, I don't think you have the patience for another interview." Dante stared at her. For a second, she thought he was going to throw her out the window. The silence stretched heavy and dangerous. Then he released her wrist with a shove. "You have 5 minutes. If you hurt me, you're done." Violet didn't waste time. She pulled back the sheet. The wound was on his left side, a jagged, ugly tear that had been stitched up with precision, but was clearly agitated. It wasn't a surgical incision. It was a gunshot wound, graze or through and through, she couldn't tell yet. The area was red and angry. "It's inflamed," she stated clinically. "You've been moving too much." "I have work to do," he muttered, reaching for a glass of amber liquid on the nightstand. Violet's hand intercepted the glass before he could touch it. She moved it to the far side of the table out of his reach. Dante's eyes narrowed. "Give that back." "Alcohol thins the blood and interferes with the antibiotics," Violet said, pulling a thermometer from her bag. "You're bleeding. No scotch." "I didn't ask for your permission," Dante snarled. He tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his side. "I said give me the drink." "No." The word hung in the air. The security guard standing by the door stiffened. Nobody said no to Dante Moretti. Dante looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. She was small with messy brown hair, tied in a bun, and scrubs that had seen better days. But her eyes, hazel and sharp, were steady. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know you're a patient with a fever of 102, who is acting like a toddler," Violet said, popping the thermometer cover. "Now open your mouth, or I'll check your temperature the other way. And trust me, you won't like that." The guard by the door actually coughed to cover a gasp. Dante stared at her stunned. A flicker of something crossed his face. Shock, amusement, rage. It was hard to tell, but slowly, grudgingly, he leaned back against the pillows. He didn't open his mouth for the thermometer, but he didn't reach for the scotch either. "Get on with it," he spat. Violet worked quickly. She cleaned the wound, changed the dressing, and checked his IV line. He watched her the entire time, his gaze heavy and unsettling. He was waiting for her hands to shake. He was waiting for her to fumble. She didn't. "You're done," he said when she taped the final gauze. "Now leave." "Not yet," Violet said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a syringe. "Time for your antibiotic and a sedative. You need sleep." "I don't sleep," Dante said. "And I don't take sedatives. They make me dull." "You heal when you sleep. It's biology, not a negotiation." She prepped the needle. Dante's hand moved to the nightstand again, but this time he didn't reach for the glass. He opened the drawer. Violet saw the glint of steel. A gun. He didn't point it at her, but he laid his hand on it, a clear warning. "I said no drugs. Leave the room, nurse, or Vance will be calling your next of kin." Violet paused. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was why the other nurses ran. The threat of violence was real. He was a mob boss, a killer. But then she thought of Toby. She thought of the final notice letters. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Violet took a step closer to the bed. She leaned down, bringing her face inches from his. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Pull it." Dante froze. "If you shoot me, you'll bleed out before the ambulance gets past your security," Violet said, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze firm. "Your wound is infected, Mr. Moretti. You're septic. If you don't take these antibiotics and sleep, you'll be dead in 48 hours. So you have a choice. You can be the big bad wolf and die in your expensive sheets, or you can let me save your life so you can go back to terrorizing Chicago next week." She held the syringe up. "Your call, boss." Dante looked at the gun. He looked at the needle. Then he looked at Violet. For a long, agonizing minute, the room was silent. Slowly, Dante took his hand off the gun. He closed the drawer. He rolled up his sleeve, exposing a muscular forearm covered in tattoos. "If you miss the vein," he warned, "I throw you out myself." "I never miss," Violet said. She administered the shot. Within minutes, Dante's eyes grew heavy. The tension in his shoulders dropped. As he drifted off, he mumbled something that sounded like, "Crazy, she's crazy." Violet exhaled, her knees finally shaking. She slumped into the chair in the corner of the room. She had survived the first hour. Only 167 hours to go. The next 2 days passed in a blur of tension and sterile silence. Violet established a routine check vitals, administer meds, change dressings, and dodge Dante's verbal bullets. He was a terrible patient, restless, commanding, and perpetually suspicious. He slept in 20-minute bursts, always waking up with a start, his hand instantly reaching for the gun in the nightstand. By Wednesday evening, the storm outside had cleared, but the atmosphere inside the penthouse was heavier than ever. Violet was in the kitchen preparing a nutrient-dense broth because Dante refused to eat solid food, claiming it slowed him down. As she chopped parsley, she heard voices raised in the study down the hall. "It's a setup, Dante. You know it is." The voice belonged to Arthur Vance. "I don't care," Dante's voice replied, weaker than usual, but still laced with steel. "If Silas thinks he can take the West shipment just because I'm bleeding, he's dead. I'm going to the meeting tonight." Violet froze. Meeting tonight. The man could barely walk to the bathroom without gripping the wall. If he went out into the cold Chicago night to meet a rival, his stitches would tear, and sepsis would finish what the bullet started. She abandoned the soup and marched down the hall. She didn't knock. She pushed the heavy oak doors open. The study was a war room. Monitors lined the walls displaying live feeds of shipping docks, warehouses, and street corners. Dante was standing barely by the desk, gripping the edge of the mahogany surface until his knuckles were white. He was dressed in a black dress shirt that was unbuttoned, revealing the fresh bandages. Vance stood opposite him, looking exasperated. Both men stopped and stared at her. "I didn't call for you," Dante said, his voice low. "I heard you're planning a field trip," Violet said, crossing her arms. "You're not going." Dante let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me. Your white blood cell count is still elevated. You're on heavy painkillers. If you stand up for more than 10 minutes, you get dizzy. You're not going to a meeting. You're going back to bed." Dante pushed himself off the desk, swaying slightly. He took a step toward her, using his height to intimidate. "This isn't a medical decision, Nurse Sterling. It's business. If I don't show my face, my enemies will think I'm dying, and if they think I'm dying, they attack. My men die. My city burns. Do you understand?" "I understand that if you go out there, you will die," Violet countered, not backing down. "And then your city burns anyway. Send Vance. Send a proxy. Use a video call. But you are not leaving this tower." "You are an employee," Dante roared, the sudden exertion making him wince. He grabbed his side, his face paling. "You do not give orders here." "I do when your stupidity threatens my patient," Violet shouted back. The room went deadly silent. Vance looked between them, eyes wide. Nobody yelled at Dante Moretti. Dante stared at her, breathing hard. The pain was evident in the tight lines of his face. He looked at the monitors, then back at her. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, Not fear of him, but fear for him. It was a look he hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe ever. "Get out," he whispered. "Dante," Vance started. "Everyone out," Dante bellowed. Violet turned on her heel and left her heart pounding. She retreated to her small guest room, shaking. She had pushed too far. He was going to fire her. She'd lose the 50,000. Toby would lose his treatment. She sat on the edge of the bed, putting her head in her hands. An hour later there was a knock on her door. It was Vance. "Pack your bags?" Violet asked, voice dull. "No," Vance said, a strange expression on his face. "He wants you to change his dressing. He tore a stitch shouting at you." Violet grabbed her kit and rushed back to the master bedroom. Dante was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking defeated. His shirt was off, and a small bloom of red was staining the white gauze. He didn't look at her as she entered. "I'm sorry," Violet said softly, kneeling beside him to inspect the wound. "I shouldn't have yelled." "You were right," Dante grunted. It sounded like the words caused him physical pain to say. "I almost passed out trying to put on my jacket." Violet worked in silence, cleaning the fresh blood. The proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating off him. He smelled of sandalwood and danger. "Why do you care?" Dante asked suddenly. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "It's just a paycheck. If I die, you still get paid. Hell, Vance would probably give you a bonus for saving him the trouble of burying me later." "I took an oath," Violet said, applying fresh tape, "to do no harm. Letting you kill yourself is harm." "That's a pretty lie," Dante said. He reached out his rough fingers, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric. Violet froze. "But everyone has a price, Violet. What's yours?" "Why are you really here?" "I need the money," she admitted, her voice trembling. "My brother, he's sick. Cystic fibrosis. The bills are suffocating." Dante's hand lingered near her face for a second longer than necessary before dropping away. His expression hardened, the mask slipping back into place. "Go to sleep, Violet. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Violet left the room, feeling a strange mix of relief and confusion. She didn't know that as soon as the door clicked shut, Dante picked up his phone. "Vance," he said into the receiver, "find out everything about Tobias Sterling, and find out who holds his debt." The long day, Dante predicted, turned out to be an understatement. Thursday brought chaos. The meeting Dante had missed was interpreted exactly as he feared weakness. The rival faction, led by a man named Silas Thorne, began making moves. Phones in the penthouse rang non-stop. Men with earpieces ran through the hallways. The calm, sterile atmosphere of the Obsidian Tower was replaced by the buzz of a command center under siege. Violet tried to keep Dante calm, but it was impossible. He was managing a war from his bed. He had 3 laptops open, barking orders at captains across the city. "They hit the warehouse in the South Loop," Dante shouted into a headset. "Then burn it if I can't have it. Silas doesn't get it either." Violet watched from the doorway, terrified. This wasn't just business. This was organized violence. She should have left. She should have taken her ethical code and run. But the thought of Toby kept her rooted. Around 2:00 a.m., the penthouse finally went quiet. The staff had retreated. Dante had finally succumbed to exhaustion and the painkillers Violet forced on him. Violet was in the kitchen, drinking water, unable to sleep. She heard a noise. Click. It was a soft, metallic sound, like a lock disengaging. She frowned. The elevator was locked down. The service stairs were alarmed. She walked into the living room. The lights were dim. At the far end of the room, near the balcony doors, a shadow moved. It wasn't a guard. The silhouette was too slender, the movement too skittish. Violet hid behind a marble pillar. She watched as the figure moved toward the hallway, toward Dante's bedroom. It was one of the housemaids, a quiet girl named Clara, who usually came in the mornings. What was she doing here at 2 a.m.? Clara reached into her apron and pulled out a small, translucent vial. She wasn't holding a duster. She was holding a syringe. Violet's blood turned to ice. Assassination. She didn't think. She didn't weigh the pros and cons. She moved. As Clara reached for the handle of Dante's bedroom door, Violet sprinted across the marble floor. She was in her socks, silent as a ghost. Just as Clara turned the knob, Violet tackled her. They crashed into the wall, a vase shattering loudly. "Let go!" Clara hissed, her eyes wild. She slashed at Violet with the syringe. "Help!" Violet screamed. "Security!" Clara was small, but she was desperate. She kicked Violet hard in the shin and scrambled up. She raised the needle, aiming for Violet's neck. Bang! The bedroom door flew open. Dante stood there, swaying, his gun raised. Clara froze. "Drop it!" Dante snarled. He looked like a demon rising from hell, pale, bandaged, and terrifying. Clara dropped the syringe. It shattered on the floor. Seconds later, security guards swarmed the room. Vance was there, looking disheveled. They grabbed Clara, dragging her away, as she screamed. "He promised. Silas promised he'd pay my debts. You're a monster, Moretti." The room fell silent again. Violet sat on the floor, gasping for air, clutching her bruised shin. She looked up. Dante was looking at her. The gun was still in his hand, but it was lowered. He walked over to her. He didn't offer a hand. He just stared down, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have a weapon," he said. "No," Violet panted. "She had a needle full of, likely potassium chloride. Stop the heart instantly. Untraceable." "I figured it wasn't insulin," Violet managed to joke, though her voice cracked. "You jumped a hired killer to save me," Dante said. He sounded puzzled, as if trying to solve a complex math problem. "Why? You could have stayed in the kitchen. You could have let her do it. You would have been safe." Violet looked at him. "I told you, Dante. I don't let my patients die." Dante knelt down. This time the movement was fluid, ignoring his pain. He reached out and took her chin in his hand, tilting her face up to the light. He looked for deception in her eyes. He found none. "You broke the rules," he whispered. "The contract said you stay out of security matters. You stay invisible." "Fire me, then," Violet challenged, though her heart was racing at his touch. "No," Dante said. His thumb brushed her lower lip, a gesture so intimate it made the room spin. "I'm not going to fire you, Violet, but you just made a very dangerous mistake." "What mistake? You made me trust you." He stood up and turned to Vance. "Take the girl downstairs. Find out what she knows, and double the security on the perimeter. Silas is getting desperate." He looked back at Violet. "Get up. You're sleeping in my room tonight." "Excuse me," Violet sputtered, scrambling to her feet. "On the couch," Dante clarified, his eyes darkening. "If Silas can buy a maid, he can buy a guard. I don't know who to trust out here, but I know you're too stubborn to kill me." Violet followed him back into the master bedroom. The dynamic had shifted. She wasn't just the nurse anymore. She was the only person in the tower Dante Moretti felt safe closing his eyes around. As she settled onto the chaise lounge in the corner, clutching a blanket, she watched him get back into bed. He placed the gun under his pillow. "Violet," he said into the darkness. "Yes, thank you." The words were so quiet, she almost missed them. Violet closed her eyes, listening to the rain start up again outside. She had saved the devil's life. Now she had to wonder if she had just damned her own. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving the Chicago skyline scrubbed clean and glistening under a pale winter sun. Inside the penthouse, however, the air remained thick with unsaid words. Violet woke up on the chaise lounge with a stiff neck. The first thing she saw was Dante. He was already awake, sitting up in bed, reviewing documents on a tablet. The gun was back on the nightstand, sitting innocuously next to a glass of water. "You snore," Dante said without looking up. Violet sat up, rubbing her face. "I do not." "You do. It's tolerable." He swiped a finger across the screen. "How is my incision?" "I haven't looked at it yet." "Good morning to you too." Violet stood up, stretching. Her body ached from the adrenaline crash of the previous night. She walked over to the bed, her nurse mode clicking back into place. "Shirt off." Dante complied. The bruising was turning a spectacular shade of purple and yellow, but the redness around the stitches had receded. The antibiotics were working. "You're healing fast," she murmured, checking his temperature. "Fever is broken. You're lucky, Dante. Most men would be in the ICU." "I told you," Dante said, his voice dropping an octave as he looked at her. "I'm hard to kill." The moment was interrupted by the vibration of Violet's phone in her scrub pocket. She pulled it out. It was a number she knew by heart. Chicago Children's Hospital. Panic spiked in her chest. They only called if something was wrong. "Hello," she answered, her voice tight. "Ms. Sterling, this is Dr. Hayes from the pulmonary unit." "Is it Toby? Is he okay?" Violet gripped the bed frame. Dante stopped reading and watched her, his eyes narrowing. "Toby is fine, Violet. Better than fine. We're prepping him for surgery. A set of lungs became available this morning. They're a perfect match. It's a miracle." Violet felt the blood drain from her face. "Surgery. But, Dr. Hayes, we're on the waiting list, but I haven't cleared the financial hold. The insurance cap. I can't pay for the transplant yet." "It's taken care of," Dr. Hayes said, sounding cheerful. "The entire balance was cleared an hour ago, plus the post-op care package. 2 years of physical therapy. It's all paid in full." Violet stood frozen. Who paid it? It was an anonymous donation made through a private trust. The Vanguard Foundation. "Look, the transport team is taking him to the OR in 20 minutes. You should be here." "I'm coming." She hung up her hand, shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. She looked at Dante. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was studiously examining a clause in his contract. "Vanguard Foundation," Violet whispered. "Vance told me your holding company is Vanguard Enterprises." Dante didn't look up. "Is it?" "You paid it. I made an investment." "An investment?" Violet's voice rose, trembling with a mix of fury and overwhelming gratitude. "You paid $500,000 for a boy you've never met." "Why?" Dante finally looked at her. His face was devoid of the cruel mask he usually wore. "Because his sister saved my life. And because I don't like owing debts. Now we're even." "Even?" Violet choked out a laugh, tears finally spilling over. "Dante, you just saved his life. That's not..." We're not even. She took a step toward him. She didn't know what she was doing. She just wanted to touch him, to verify that the ruthless mob boss who threatened to shoot her on Monday was the same man who saved her brother on Friday. She reached out, placing her hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Thank you." Dante went still. He looked at her hand, then up at her lips. The tension in the room shifted instantly from gratitude to something much hotter. The air felt charged like the seconds before a lightning strike. "Be careful, Violet," he warned, his voice rough. "You don't know who you're thanking. I'm not a hero." "You are to me," she whispered. Dante leaned in. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the pulse point under her jaw. He pulled her closer. Violet's breath hitched. She could feel the heat of his skin, smell the soap and danger that clung to him. Just as their lips were about to touch, the door burst open. "Boss, we have a problem." It was Vance. He stopped dead in the doorway, taking in the scene. Violet jumped back, her face burning. Dante let out a growl of frustration that shook his chest. "This better be good, Arthur," Dante said, his voice deadly quiet. "It's Silas," Vance said, looking pale. "He knows about the girl. He knows about Violet. And he knows she's going to the hospital." Dante's face hardened into stone. The tenderness vanished instantly. "How?" "We have a leak in the transport team. Silas has a hit squad sitting on the I-90 off-ramp near the hospital. If she goes to see her brother, she's walking into a kill box." Violet gasped. "I have to go." "Toby is going into surgery." "No," Dante said, swinging his legs out of bed. He stood up, wincing only slightly. "You can't go alone. I'm not missing this Dante. He's scared. He needs me." "I know," Dante said. He walked to the walk-in closet and grabbed a Kevlar vest. He winced as he pulled it on over his bandages, but he didn't stop. He threw a fresh button-down shirt over it. "What are you doing?" Violet asked. "I'm taking you," Dante said, grabbing a heavy trench coat to conceal the vest and his sidearm. "Vance, ready the armored SUV. We're taking the lower Wacker route. Call the tactical team. Nobody touches her." "Dante, you can't leave," Violet protested. "Your stitches." He turned to her, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was firm, possessive. "You kept me alive for 5 days, Violet. Today I keep you alive. Let's go." The convoy consisted of 3 black SUVs. Violet and Dante were in the middle vehicle, a custom-built Cadillac Escalade with bulletproof glass an inch thick. The interior was silent. Dante sat stiffly scanning the mirrors. He held a submachine gun, a compact MP5 resting on his lap. It looked terrifyingly natural in his hands. "Stay down," Dante told her as they merged onto the highway. Below the window line. "This is insane," Violet whispered, crouched on the floorboard. "This is Chicago, not a war zone." "In my world, there's no difference," Dante muttered. They descended into Lower Wacker Drive, the subterranean labyrinth of streets that ran beneath the city. It was a place of shadows, pillars, and speeding cars. The GPS signal cut out. The orange streetlights flickered overhead like dying stars. "Eyes up," Dante said into his earpiece. "Silas knows this route. It's a choke point." As if on cue, a garbage truck pulled out from a service tunnel ahead, blocking both lanes. "Ambush!" the driver screamed. "Reverse!" Dante roared. But behind them, a white van slammed into the rear SUV, pinning the convoy. Gunfire erupted instantly. It was deafening. Bullets hammered against the armored glass of their car, sounding like hail on a tin roof. Spiderwebs of cracks appeared, but held. "Get down!" Dante shouted, pushing Violet's head lower. The doors of the garbage truck flew open. Men in ski masks poured out carrying assault rifles. "They're swarming!" Vance yelled from the front seat. "We can't hold them." "We're not staying," Dante said. He kicked his door open, using the armored door as a shield. "Violet, when I say move, you run for the service tunnel on the left. Do not stop. Do not look back." "I'm not leaving you," she screamed over the noise of the gunfire. "Go!" Dante fired a burst from his MP5, dropping a man who was rushing their car. He grunted, clutching his side. The recoil was tearing his wound open. Violet saw the blood seeping through his coat. "You're bleeding. Move!" He grabbed her arm and shoved her out of the car onto the concrete. The noise was overwhelming screams, tires screeching and the relentless pop, pop, pop of automatic fire. They sprinted toward the service tunnel. Dante moved with a terrifying grace, firing with one hand while shielding Violet with his body. He took a hit to the shoulder. The Kevlar caught it, but the impact staggered him. "Dante, keep moving." They reached the heavy steel door of the maintenance tunnel. Dante kicked it open. They spilled into a damp, dark corridor that smelled of rust and sewage. Dante slammed the door shut and wedged a metal pipe through the handle to barricade it. He slid down the wall, gasping for air. His face was grey. Violet fell to her knees beside him. "Let me see." She tore open his coat. The stitches had ripped. He was bleeding heavily again. "We need to cauterize this or apply pressure," she said, her hands shaking but her mind clear. She ripped the hem of her scrub top to make a compression bandage. "Leave me," Dante wheezed. "Follow the tunnel. It comes out near the Navy Pier parking garages. You can lose them in the crowd." "Shut up," Violet said, pressing the cloth hard against his side. "I didn't keep you alive all week, just to let you die in a sewer." Dante looked at her, his eyes hazy with pain. "Why are you so stubborn? Professional hazard." Suddenly the door behind them buckled. Boom! They were using a battering ram. "They're coming," Dante said. He reloaded his weapon. "Violet, listen to me. Silas Easterholmes wants me. If they get through, I'll draw their fire. You run." "No," a voice echoed from the other end of the corridor. Violet and Dante spun around. Standing at the far end of the tunnel, blocking their exit, was a man in a beige trench coat. He was flanked by 4 heavily armed mercenaries. He had a scarred face and a smile that looked like a jagged wound. It was Silas Thorne. "How touching," Silas drawled, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "Romeo and Juliet, in the sewers." Dante tried to raise his gun, but he was too weak. One of Silas's men stepped forward and kicked the weapon out of his hand. Another kicked Dante in the chest, sending him sprawling. "No!" Violet screamed, throwing herself over Dante's body. "Get off him, darling," Silas said, walking closer. He clicked the safety off his pistol. "Don't touch her," Dante rasped, trying to push himself up. "Take me. Let her go." Silas laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Oh, Dante, you still don't get it. I don't want to kill you. Not yet. I want your territory. I want your shipping routes, and I want the codes to your offshore accounts." "Go to hell," Dante spat. "I thought you might say that," Silas said. He looked at Violet. "That's why I'm not going to torture you, Dante. I'm going to take her." 2 men grabbed Violet, hauling her up. She kicked and screamed, landing a solid punch on one man's jaw, but they were too strong. They dragged her away from Dante. "Let her go." Dante roared, struggling to stand, but a rifle butt to the back of his head knocked him down again. "Here's the deal," Silas said, leaning over Dante. "You have 24 hours to transfer the assets to me. If you don't, well, the nurse gets to see just how good her anatomy knowledge really is." Silas turned and walked away, his men dragging a screaming Violet into the darkness. "Dante!" she screamed one last time before a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. Dante lay on the wet concrete blood pooling around him, watching the only light in his life disappear into the shadows. He didn't pass out. He didn't die. Instead, a cold, ancient rage filled him. It numbed the pain. It slowed his heart. He reached into his boot and pulled out a backup phone, a burner he kept for emergencies. His fingers left bloody smears on the screen as he dialed. "Vance," he whispered into the phone. "Initiate Protocol 0. "Sir." Vance's voice crackled, sounding terrified. "Protocol 0 burns everything. It's total war." "They took her," Dante said, staring at the empty tunnel. "Burn it all down. I want every shooter in Chicago on the street in 10 minutes. Nobody sleeps, nobody eats, until I get her back." He dropped the phone and forced himself to stand up. He was bleeding, he was broken, and he was outnumbered, but they had made a mistake. They left the devil alive, and now he was coming for his soul. The location was an abandoned shipyard in the industrial district, a graveyard of rusted steel and rotting wood jutting out into the icy waters of Lake Michigan. It was the kind of place where screams were swallowed by the wind. Violet sat zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of a cavernous warehouse. Her scrub top was torn, and a bruise was forming on her cheek, but her eyes were dry. She was analyzing the room. 4 exits, 6 guards, Silas Thorne pacing in front of her like a caged tiger. "He's not coming, you know," Silas sneered, checking his watch. "He's bleeding out in a sewer somewhere. Smartest thing he could do is die quietly." "You don't know him," Violet said, her voice steady despite the cold. "And you don't know anatomy. The human body can survive immense trauma if the will is strong enough. And his will. It's terrifying." Silas laughed, leaning in close. "You think this is a fairy tale. You think the beast comes to save beauty. This is business. Dante Moretti loves his empire more than..." The lights went out. Total suffocating darkness swallowed the warehouse. The hum of the generator died with a sputtering cough. "Backup power!" Silas screamed, pulling his gun. "Get the flashlights! Crash!" The skylight 30 feet above shattered, not from a stone, but from a body rappelling down. Flares popped, bathing the warehouse in blinding red light. Gunfire erupted from the catwalks above. It wasn't a spray of bullets. It was precise, rhythmic double taps. Thwip, 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 thwip. Silas's men started dropping. "Kill her!" Silas shrieked, spinning around to find Violet in the chaos. He aimed his gun at her chest. Violet squeezed her eyes shut. Bang! The shot didn't hit her. It hit Silas's hand. His gun flew across the concrete. He howled in pain, clutching his shattered fingers. Violet opened her eyes. Standing at the edge of the flare's red glow was Dante. He looked like a nightmare. His coat was gone, his shirt was soaked in blood, and his face was pale as death. But he was standing. He held a smoking pistol in his right hand, his left arm pressed tight against his injured side. "I told you." Dante rasped, his voice carrying over the groans of the dying men. "I want my soul back." Silas scrambled backward, slipping on the wet floor. "You're dead," You should be dead." "I am," Dante said, stepping closer. Every step looked like agony. But he didn't stop. "I died 5 days ago, when I met her. The man standing here. He's just the consequences of your stupidity." Silas lunged for a knife on his belt. Dante didn't even flinch. He fired one shot into Silas's leg, dropping him to his knees. Then he walked up and kicked the knife away. The warehouse fell silent, save for the wind whistling through the broken glass. The guards were neutralized. It was just the three of them. Dante holstered his gun. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at Violet. He walked over to her, his hands trembling as he pulled a knife to cut her ties. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Just a bruise," Violet whispered, rubbing her wrists. She looked at his side. The blood was flowing freely now. "Dante, you need a hospital. Now!" "Not yet." Dante turned back to Silas, who was sobbing on the floor. "Please," Silas begged. "I'll give you the territory. I'll leave Chicago. Just let me go." Dante looked down at him with cold indifference. "You threatened my family." "She's just a nurse," Silas cried. "She's my wife," Dante said. Violet froze. Silas froze. "Or she will be," Dante amended, glancing at her. "If she doesn't kill me for this." He turned to Vance, who had just entered from the side door with a team of cleaners. "Vance, handle the trash." "Understood, sir," Vance said, nodding at Silas. Dante put his arm around Violet, leaning heavily on her. "Take me home, nurse. I think I finally need that sedative." 3 days later, the private room at Chicago Children's Hospital was filled with balloons. Toby was sitting up pale, but smiling, breathing on his own with the new lungs. Violet stood by the window watching the snow fall. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she stood in her kitchen staring at the overdue bills. The door opened. Dante walked in. He was using a cane now, and his movements were stiff, but he was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit. He didn't look like a patient anymore. He looked like the king of Chicago. "How is he?" Dante asked, nodding toward Toby. "Dr. Hayes says his stats are perfect," Violet said. She turned to face him. "They said the donor was an anonymous match from out of state, but the transport was expedited by a private jet." Dante shrugged. "Logistics are my specialty." "You did everything," Violet said. "You saved him. You saved me." "And you saved me," Dante said. He walked over to her. "I fired the staff, Violet. All of them. Everyone. The maids, the cooks, the guards. I'm starting over. New team. People I can trust." "That sounds lonely," Violet said. "It is," Dante admitted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "That's why I have a job opening. It's a permanent position. No salary, but the benefits are unlimited." Violet's heart stopped. "Dante." "I'm not a good man, Violet," he said, his dark eyes intense. "I've done terrible things. I have enemies living with me. It's not safe. It's not normal. But I can't breathe when you're not in the room. I can't sleep unless I know you're there." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not a gaudy diamond, but a rare, deep green emerald, the color of life amidst the black steel of his world. "Violet Sterling," he whispered. "Will you be the last nurse I ever hire?" Violet looked at the ring. She looked at Toby, safe and breathing. She looked at the man who had walked through gunfire and sewers just to keep a promise. She thought about the rules. She thought about the danger. Then she smiled. "I have one condition," she said. Dante raised an eyebrow. "Anything." "No more shooting people in the living room. It ruins the carpet." Dante grinned a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Deal." He slipped the ring on her finger. He kissed her right there in the hospital room, sealing a pact that was more binding than any blood oath. The Devil of Chicago had finally been tamed, not by a bullet and not by a rival, but by the one thing he never saw coming, a poor nurse who simply refused to let him die. And that is how Violet Sterling went from drowning in debt to ruling the Chicago underworld beside the most dangerous man in the city. It turns out the most powerful medicine in the world isn't an antibiotic or a surgery. It's loyalty. Dante Moretti thought he was hiring an employee, but he found a savior. They say love conquers all, but in their world, love is just another kind of war, and they were the only two left standing. The doctor said Dante's heart was too damaged to ever fully recover. They were wrong. He just needed someone brave enough to restart it. Wow, what a journey. From a desperate $12 bank balance to the top of the empire. I have to ask you guys, if someone offered you $50,000 to spend a week with a dangerous stranger, would you take the risk, or would you run the other way? Let me know your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and twists, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next part of our storytelling saga. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.